story of Candyman is so perennial, and that's part of the reason why it's exciting to tell it in any time period. From the origin of the story itself in the context of the first film, in the 1890s to now. What we're talking about, I think, is the cycles of violence and how history repeats itself and how we collectively grieve and collectively process trauma, which is through stories. So I think it's always a time to tell a story like Candyman, which is, kind of the big tragedy of the tale in the first place.
The original Candyman, written and directed by Bernard Rose, based on a story by Clive Barker, is one of my favorites. It's a very influential movie for me, mainly because I believe it came out in 1992, so I would have been like 13. And I was a horror fan, and we didn't have a black Freddy. We didn't have a black Jason. We identified with Freddy and Jason. But when Candyman came along, it felt very daring, and it felt very cathartic, and it was terrifying. So this was one of the movies that told me we can that black people can be in horror, even though there are many examples of black people in horror movies. This was one for me that felt particularly badass.
Candyman was just like a real sort of urban legend when I was growing up. It wasn't necessarily just attached to the movie. It felt very present. I went to school right next to the projects. I lived across the street from the projects, and so for us, Candyman was just hanging out over, across the street from us. And so I think the first time I saw it was in elementary school. But this was after I'd already kind of lived with the idea of there being some demon ghost man killing people in the project. So I think my first time seeing the movie was like terrifying, as it is for most people, but I'd already kind of had this lore in my head. So it was kind of like connecting the dots. I was like, oh, that's Candyman. I see, I get it.
The original film, Helen, is a bit of the, played expertly by Virginia Madsen, by the way. Helen Lyle is a bit of a fish out of water, to say the least, in the Cabrini Green area. And a lot is focused on her fear and therefore the audience's fear of this space, of this black space. Cabrini Green has been torn down and is fairly gentrified now. And the story that resonated to me now is the story of my fear of the white space, and to be able to explore the quote unquote mirror image or the flip of the first one, to me was a point that made the project worthy in itself, to see the full realization of the conversation that this movie is.
I basically looked to history, and there are stories that I already knew, stories that I found as I was doing research, that I wanted to take inspiration from. I didn't want to take these people's lives and say they're part of the Candyman lore, but just to be inspired by things that had actually happened, and that related to our story. And really, it was because I wanted to show how prevalent, common these horrific events are, and how they're just, this is a straight line from Danny Robitaille to Anthony and all the people in between. So for me, it was really necessary to take inspiration from real life, but also not co-opt a story and put it into our narrative. So I think that was also a balance to strike. With Candyman, with talking about unwilling martyrs, I wanted to make sure that in the rush to sort of process what happened and to choose a side and to create sense of something horrifying, that we don't forget the life of the person who was harmed, who was killed. Because a martyr is a powerful symbol, a monster is a powerful symbol, but at the end of the day, if the name isn't remembered, then then what are we're really talking about? Because the name, the person, the life that was lost, that's the most important thing. And so, you know, in Candyman, it's say his name, say his name, say his name. People say Candyman, but they don't say the name of Danny Robitaille or Anthony McCoy. And so that was commentary on that as well, and also on like what's happening in the movement now, which is so powerful, which is like say the name of the person, say Breonna Taylor, say Jacob Blake, you know, which I think is really powerful and really important, and what I wanted to talk more about in relation to Candyman, which is that he's not a monster, he's not a martyr, he's Danny Robitaille, a painter who lost his life, or he's Anthony McCoy, a painter and awkward dude who lost his life, you know. I want to talk about humanity. How do you maintain tension when you know as soon as you say a fifth Candyman, the people who said it are gonna die? Like, how do you prolong that? How do you make that exciting to watch every time it happens? Also, how do you like make someone saying Candyman 5 times like interesting every time it happens in the movie? So it was really fun to kind of figure out different ways to do them, and also different scenarios and different people would happen to, and different ways that they say Candyman 5 times, and from a practical like workflow point of view, like we did a lot of previs, in particular because mirrors were so important, obviously, to the movie, and so trying to figure out like how to shoot the reflection of a reflection where, you know, in space like Candyman would be and all that stuff was really complicated. So previs was really really helpful. And then on the day, it was really about like putting all the parts together, and then like the actors like having fun with their gruesome deaths.
I think what Nia has really done is she's explored race on all the levels, from the uncomfortable to the downright devastating, and she's kept a love story in there at the center, a tragic love story at the center, like the original as well.
Well, I hope the audiences get, you know, wrapped up in the story. I hope they can engage with and identify with the main characters and to feel what they're feeling. I want them to be scared. I want them to be sad, and I want them to understand, you know, something more than they knew before, or they understood before walking into the film. That might be too much to ask, but I just hope people leave it changed, but at the very least, thinking more.